Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome and I'm here to break down UFC 318, which goes down this weekend. We've got the baddest motherfucker title on the line. It's a trilogy fight as well, so there's plenty going off at the top of the card. But just a very quick PSA from my side. This will be the final podcast for a couple of weeks as I'll be flying to Greece on Thursday. So yeah, for the next few events, there's going to be no podcast. So that's the reason why. However, what I will do, if I do get reminded whilst I'm over there, I will drop my picks for the card as a post, as a social post onto YouTube. So there'll still be something to at least read. There'll still be my picks there and my method of victory. You know, I'll drop all that in for you guys. But yeah, for the podcast itself, there will be nothing for a couple of weeks whilst I'm away. And back to UFC 318. It's an unbelievable card. You know, it's a pay-per-view. It's stacked. I'm looking forward to getting into it. But just before we do, if you want to jump into the action this weekend, which I'm assuming for a big fight card for the baddest motherfucker title, you are going to want to do that. Make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for every type of gambler, whether you're a long-term gambler that likes to also make your own final decisions. We've got written breakdowns for you guys so you can understand exactly where I'm coming from as the professional handicapper with the recommended bets. You can see my reasoning and understand why. We've got a fun gambler section for you guys that just like to hit those fun parlays, try and turn that $10 into something much larger. Whether you want pre-built parlays or whether you want to build your own parlays with some of the best selections on offer, we've got all that for you in the fun gambler section. Or if you're somebody that just wants to tail a professional handicapper, then there's that section for you as well with the official bets, which is exactly where my money is going. And of course, every single betting subscription comes with Bayes AI. That's our UFC prediction software, which is on absolute fire this year. And that gives you a percentage prediction for every possible outcome of every UFC fight. And it's all included in one subscription. All you have to do is choose whether you want to go for one event, pay monthly, or take advantage of our Super Saver option and jump on to the annual option at just $99 for the entire year. That's all at MMAplay365.com. And with the introduction out the way, with the promo out of the way, let's get down to breaking some fights down. And of course, as always, we start in the main event. We've got the BMF title on the line. Who is going to be the baddest motherfucker? Max Holloway is the current BMF champion, with Dustin Poirier looking to rip that away from him. It's a trilogy fight. This is the third time both of these fighters have fought. And yeah, look, it's Dustin Poirier's last fight as well. So what an absolute gift that will be for Dustin Poirier, for the career that he's had, everything that he's gifted us with, you know, the entertaining fights and the knockouts over the years. If he can sail away not only on a win, but being the baddest motherfucker as well, that's got to be, you know, if that outcome happens, that's got to be the all-time greatest retirement fight, you know, in the history of mixed martial arts. So yeah, it's an interesting one. Look, as for, you know, this being the trilogy, Dustin Poirier is 2-0 over Max Holloway. Now, the first time that these guys fought, it was that long ago that it's not even worth mentioning. You know, so much has changed since then with both fighters. The second fight is a little more relevant, but there's still a lot of differences in the situation. Like, the last time they fought, Max Holloway jumped up in weight to fight for the title. I believe it was an interim title against Dustin Poirier. But at that point in the featherweight division, Volkanovski wasn't really there as yet, and Holloway was just destroying absolutely everybody. There was nobody in the division really for Holloway to really be challenged against, and certainly not beaten by. So Holloway decided to make that decision, move up in weight, where he fought Dustin Poirier, who at the time, you know, was absolutely banging his prime. And I just don't think it was the right situation at that right time for Holloway to get a win. He did get comfortably beaten, and he was a big favourite as well, by the way. Well, I'd say a moderate favourite, a slight to moderate favourite actually. He was around the minus 200, minus 225 line. I actually cashed Dustin Poirier at about plus 180, I think it was, plus 185. So I actually cashed him as the underdog there because I did wonder whether Holloway was maybe going to be a little undersized. Poirier's, the natural lightweight. He was also in his prime in his own division as well. So I kind of made the right reads at that point. But it's a little bit differently because Max Holloway, he became the BMF champion for beating Justin Gaethje in the lightweight division over 5 rounds. And if you remember, it's probably the best knockout that has ever happened in the history of the sport. I think you'd have to go back and really analyze certain knockouts to be confident in that. But it's definitely, if somebody says to me, what's the best knockout you've ever seen, it's in there within the top 3 easily. But that happened within the last couple of seconds of the round. So the reason I've mentioned that is, look, Holloway's gone 5 rounds against a very good lightweight in his own division. So a very similar scenario to what happened with Dustin Poirier years back. So I kind of feel that Max Holloway is now, is used to that weight. He's got a win against a very good solidified lightweight, just like Poirier is. And he's done it over 5 rounds as well, and got the knockout in that 5th round, and he was winning the fight up until that point as well. So I think Holloway's cleared all the sort of lightweight hurdles, stepping up in weight hurdles that hit him last time. So I think he's going to be in a much better position here than what he was the last time he fought Dustin Poirier. And then you've got to factor in the fact that, look, I know that I've made a real good song and dance out of Poirier's last fight, and if he can go out on a win and be the BMF champion, but the bottom line is that the retirement fight is there. And when you go back and look historically at fighters that have stated that they're having their last fight, or even after the fight, when we don't know prior, and they've come out and said, oh, look, this was always going to be my last fight. Not many fighters win that retirement fight. Now, Poirier is slightly different to the rest because I don't think he's hit a hard decline or anything. Of course, he's not the same fighter as what he was a few years ago, but I don't think he's on a hard decline. He's still going to be competitive with the best of the best in the division. So there is slight differences on Poirier's side, but still, the retirement fight historically is one that isn't won by many fighters that have either claimed that they're retiring before the fight or have known it in their head but not told us till after the fight. So it has to be taken into consideration. And then you look at Max Holloway, like the fighters that he's losing against is like Ilia Topuria and Volkanovski 3 times. Like Volkanovski is one of the best in the world. Topuria arguably, some will call pound for pound the best in the world. So it's not as if Holloway is losing against, bad fighters. Like, he's still in his prime. He's still an absolute savage. You look at his last 3 wins. Here's some numbers for you. So Max Holloway's last 5 wins in the UFC, as he's attempted 1,847 strikes, landing 1,078 of them in his last 5 fights. These are like inhuman numbers. So the pace and the pressure Holloway has still got, and I just don't know whether this is the fight where Holloway puts on that absolute clinic that some people were expecting it to happen the last time these two fought. For me, Poirier is going to be nowhere near Holloway from a volume perspective, but what Poirier will be doing or likes to do is that heavy pressure and he landing the heavier punches. But this time, I just don't think Holloway is going to be as phased with the heavy punches as he was last time, because that's how Poirier beat him last time. The pressure, the heavier punches. But I think Holloway, with him being used to lightweight and the power and the physicality of the opponents at lightweight, I think Holloway's used to that now. So sure, he's going to get hit, but I just see a very high volume approach from Holloway here. I think he's going to put pace and pressure on Poirier. I think he's going to put it on him, and I just feel like Poirier will be competitive, but I just think he's going to get drowned round by round here. I don't think it's, I'm not necessarily saying it's going to be like a 50-45, absolute whitewash, but I just think that Holloway is going to turn it up here and do what many predicted that he was going to do in the last fight. I think now's the time for Holloway to do that. I think he bites down, pushes through, high pace, high pressure, high volume. And again, it does concern me with it being Poirier's retirement fight as well. So yeah, for me, I think Max Holloway gets the fight and plays the fight out that he wanted and would have expected himself to the last time. I think he does this time. For those reasons, I'm picking Max Holloway to win, and still the baddest motherfucker. And in the next fight in the co-main event, this is an interesting fight and one that I'm quite torn and split on, if I'm being honest. We've got Paulo Costa versus Roman Kopylov. Now, Paulo Costa has always been one of my favourite fighters to watch. I suppose I do have a bias there because I just enjoy watching Costa fights, whether he wins or whether he loses. They're just always super entertaining fights. He's an absolute unit. You know, he's got personality about him. He looks to try and take his opponent's head off. He's the exact type of fighter that... And he's always in the exact type of fight that if you've got a friend that's never watched MMA and you're trying to get them into MMA, well, just show them a Paulo Costa fight because, you know, the fights are just always crazy. Now, the thing is with Paulo Costa, I think from a public perspective, he isn't liked at all. People like to fade him. And I think a lot of fans discredit like how good he actually is. Like, you look at his losses in the UFC, and you know there is a flip side to this. I always believe in, you know, hitting both sides of the narrative rather than just focusing on what you want to focus on and then building that narrative into your opinion. So you've always got to hit both sides of the narrative. But in regards to the opponents that he's lost against, Sean Strickland, you know, former champion. Are got Marvin Vettori, who is a former title challenger. Robert Whittaker, former champion. Israel Adesanya, former champion. Like, these are elite fighters that Paulo Costa's losing against, and then he goes against Roman Kopylov here, who is absolutely... This is Roman Kopylov's huge step up in competition. Paulo Costa's taken a big step down in competition, and that's not disrespectful to Roman Kopylov. It's just Roman Kopylov is not Israel Adesanya, Robert Whittaker, Sean Strickland, and Marvin Vettori. Like, it is definitely a step down in competition for Costa, but then you look at the fighters that Costa's beaten, and, you know, he's beaten some decent fighters, but when you look at the opponents that he is beating, you know, are they at Roman Kopylov's level? Well, some probably are around, or at least at the time where Costa fought them had, you know, that skill set that would be around Kopylov's level. So, yeah, probably Costa is in a position where he's got a step down in competition and should win this fight. But then you look at the odds and Costa's a big underdog. So it's like, you know, the market is completely and utterly writing Paulo Costa off. And especially with Roman Kopylov. Roman Kopylov is going, you know, toe-to-toe, punch for punch against a Chris Curtis, for example, that's just gone to a split decision against Max Griffin. And again, I'm not saying that in a disrespectful way, but these aren't fighters that... at Paulo Costa's level, or at least the opponents that Paulo Costa is getting beaten against. So it's a real tricky fight because it's going to be predominantly a stand-up fight. Don't really see too much wrestling or grappling. And Kopylov is a very good technical striker, whereas Costa's a good technical striker too, but he's more of a powerhouse. He'll give it more earlier in the fight than he does later in the fight. And again, this is what's going to be another very interesting stylistic dynamic because, you know, if Costa does, you know, output a lot of volume and power early on in this fight, then he might get Kopylov out of there. And he could overwhelm Kopylov. But then what's his gas tank going to look like if he doesn't get Kopylov out? Does Kopylov, you know, weather a storm and then allow the technique to build him into the fight and then slowly take over the fight the longer it goes on? You know, that's a possibility as well. It's just a really tough fight. Because, like I say, Costa is a level above Kopylov, in my opinion, especially with the competition that he's been fighting over, you know, the last X amount of years. Kopylov's a step down for Costa. Costa's a step up for Kopylov. Kopylov probably the better technical striker, but Costa's definitely efficient, definitely got the power edge here as well. And like I say, the fighters that Kopylov is beating is just nowhere near Costa, and the fighters that Costa's losing against are miles ahead of Kopylov. It's just a real difficult fight to predict, in my opinion. I think the line, for that reason, I think the line should be slightly closer. Paulo Costa is a relatively sized underdog. You can get him for around plus 200, plus 210, and I think if you are hell-bent on betting this fight, that's the way you've got to go with the underdog, because, look, I'm a bit like head and heart here. Like, my heart's with Costa, my head's saying Kopylov, but again, it's like, it's so tough because of the other intangibles surrounding surrounding the fight, because when you look at it from the bigger picture perspective, you've got a stand-up striking war with Kopylov, the better striker. That's, without all the intricate analysis, that's the outright overview of the fight. But there's just something telling me that Costa's going to get back in the win column here. And like I say, I think for a fight where the betting line should be much closer, I am just going to side with the underdog, and I'm picking Paulo Costa to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Kevin Holland. Again, it seems like we see Kevin Holland like every few weeks at this point, and well, not at this point, over the last few years, against Daniel Rodriguez. Now, from Daniel Rodriguez's perspective, I cashed Daniel Rodriguez last time out. And I think for Daniel Rodriguez, he, at this stage in his career, is on a decline. I think, that is something that's quite obvious. He's definitely not the same fighter as what he was 3 or 4 years ago, significantly lesser. But there's still wins in him, hence last time out. But I feel like for Daniel Rodriguez, he needs the type of fighters now that are also where he is. So like a Ponzinibbio last time, I love that fight for Daniel Rodriguez, and I love the fight in general because it's two fighters that we're very high up in the division that are on declines fighting each other. And for me, that's where Daniel Rodriguez is going to thrive in 2025 and moving forwards. But Kevin Holland isn't that fighter. Kevin Holland is a fighter that's still definitely in his prime. He's super active. I love him at 170. At welterweight, obviously at middleweight, he cuts less weight, is a little bit smaller and not as physical for the division, and he can get run through at times. But at welterweight, he's big, he's strong, he's athletic. I love him at 170. So I think Daniel Rodriguez has got a real problem in front of him here, because I think Holland is going to be quicker, faster movement. I think he's going to be first to the punch. I think the volume's going to be higher. I think he mixes things up a little bit better as well from the striking perspective, so he will use kicks, whereas Daniel Rodriguez is very boxing heavy, so Holland mixes it up well on the feet. I think from a wrestling and grappling perspective, I think Holland can get at Rodriguez there as well. Holland's a legit black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which people do forget, but I think he's going to be the better striker, the better wrestler, the better grappler. He's going to be more athletic. I think he's going to potentially have a power advantage at 170 as well. Definitely a speed and movement advantage. I think it's a real tough fight for Daniel Rodriguez, and I'd actually be quite surprised if Rodriguez wins this fight, because, like I say, Rodriguez is in a position now in his career where he needs to be fighting fighters around his sort of declined level, if that makes sense, to be able to get wins at the UFC level. But I think in a fighter in Holland who seems to have pretty much every box checked here and is younger and in his prime, I just think it's a rough one for Rodriguez. So for those reasons, I'm picking Kevin Holland to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Dan Ige versus Patricio Pitbull. So look, I'll always tell you when I'm right, and I'll like to, thrive off when I've been correct. And I've already said, look, I cashed Daniel Rodriguez when every man and his dog was on the Ponzinibbio side. I cashed Dustin Poirier, the second Holloway fight, when every man and his dog was on Holloway. So I'll always tell you when I've done a good job. Look, I was wrong about Pitbull against Yair Rodriguez. I thought that the UFC would set that up knowing what they were doing. They didn't want the new toy to be broken on the first time of playing with it, and all that sort of stuff that I said last time. And look, I never made out that Pitbull was going to easily beat Yair Rodriguez. Like, Pitbull was like a plus 150, plus 160 underdog. Like, he was an underdog, and clearly for a reason, but Rodriguez made that look so much easier than what I thought it would be if Rodriguez won the fight. But the thing is, there was difficulties there for Pitbull. UFC debut. The one thing that I outlined as well, and I kind of think that played a factor as well that not many people are speaking about, is I said that in Bellator/PFL, Pitbull had predominantly fought 5 rounds because he was a champion more or less the entire time. So he was fighting 5-round fights. Whereas when he came to the UFC, it was a 3-round fight that he's probably not used to. And I kind of think that factored into it, because Pitbull did start picking things up the later the fight went. Maybe there was a case of, oh, well, I know I'm down a couple of rounds, so now I've got to try everything to finish this fight. But I do think that if that was a 5-round fight, Pitbull would have been in a better position. But because it was 3 rounds, he probably didn't get started as quick as what he should have done. So I'm hoping now with this fight that Pitbull's very aware of that. He's very aware of, and he's back to, being used to 3-round fights. He's had his UFC debut, so if there was any UFC debut jitters, which, I don't care where you come from, what promotion you come from, the UFC is the brightest lights of the sport, so those jitters are always possible. But then he fought a top 5 guy in Yair Rodriguez on that UFC debut as well, and he did have difficulties with Yair Rodriguez's height, his reach, his range, so I kind of feel like, in hindsight, which is obviously the most beautiful thing in this sport, it wasn't right for Pitbull. But now Pitbull's fighting Dan Ige here. Dan Ige is a massive step down in competition from Yair Rodriguez. That's not even a hot take, that's a fact. Dan Ige is not a top 5 guy. We've got Pitbull that's now just fought 3 rounds, so he's gonna be in a better position here. And Dan Ige also doesn't have the height, the length, the reach and the range of a Yair Rodriguez. Whereas, with this time, Pitbull's got a fighter that's very similar to him in height, reach and range. So I think Pitbull's in a much better position here than what he was against Yair Rodriguez. And the price is about the same as well. Like, this is the other thing. I kind of expected this fight to be a bit of a pick'em, people recognising and realising that Pitbull was just fighting a really good version of Yair Rodriguez with a lot of things stacked against him. And now he's gone against Dan Ige, which is a big step down in competition. So let's put it as a pick'em to find out. But that's not the case. Like, Pitbull's still like a plus 140, plus 150 underdog. Now, Dan Ige's got a serious amount of power. One of the hardest hitters in the division. That's something that Pitbull's got to be careful of. But, Dan Ige loses fights in the UFC as well. So that power's not the be-all and end-all. Fighters can game plan around it. Patricio Pitbull is a high-level Muay Thai striker. Good background within striking. I think if anyone can potentially game plan around a power striker, it's Pitbull. And, I don't think that Ige is going to present something on the table that Pitbull hasn't seen and dealt with before. And then when you look at Dan Ige, like, Ige's actually a really good grappler, a really good MMA grappler, but it definitely seems to be that he's much better offensively topside than he is defensively on his back, because a lot of the fights that Dan Ige loses, he's lost 8 in the UFC, 6 of them he's had takedowns hit against him. Some of them have had like 3 to 5 plus takedowns on him, and he can be got at from the wrestling and grappling perspective, and Pitbull's got sneaky good wrestling and a good topside grappling game as well. So I kind of feel that Pitbull, as long as he stays away from the power, can beat Ige from a striking perspective. But then I think from a wrestling and grappling perspective, it's there for Pitbull as well. So I kind of feel that, this is a good return fight for Pitbull after what he's just dealt with Rodriguez. Pitbull's still your elite fighter, even though, like I say, he's up there in age now. He's got a fighter here in Ige that's also been through the wars and got a lot of miles on the clock as well. I think the fight's going to be close and competitive, but I actually like Pitbull again here. I think that he's not going to have the same physical issues as a Yair Rodriguez, and I think he's a fighter that could thrive in this second attempt in the UFC. Again, big step down in competition, and I think it's one that Pitbull could thrive in. So for those reasons, I'm picking Patricio Pitbull to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Michael Johnson versus Daniel Zellhuber. So Zellhuber's got to mind his P's and Q's in this fight. Like, Michael Johnson, even though he's been around for years, he's got a lot of miles on the clock, he's getting up there in age, he's probably not the fighter he was a few years ago. The dude's got seriously fast hands still, and speed's one of the first things to go with age as well, but the speed of his strikes are still absolutely unbelievable. The power's okay. Do I see him knocking Zellhuber out? Well, look, if he's catching him with hard combinations, then yeah, there's every chance that he could knock him out. But I just think that Zellhuber won't put himself in a situation where, he's eating a lot of combinations. He's definitely got to be careful. He's definitely got to mind his P's and Q's, but with the right game plan, you can work around that speed of Michael Johnson. And I think with Zellhuber is in a much better position in his career right now as well. More heading toward, I still don't think he's completely in his prime, but, he's getting close to there. He's a fighter that is highly skilled, that's improving from fight to fight. And I actually think he's got more ways to win this fight, because although Zellhuber is a predominant striker, it wouldn't shock me for him to try and take Johnson down. Now, Johnson's a decent wrestler, got good defensive wrestling as well, so I'm not saying that Zellhuber is going to be overly successful with that, but even if he just attempts a few takedowns here, just putting that takedown and just putting the wrestling in play is going to just make Johnson a little bit hesitant of going too full ham, if that makes sense, with the strikes and putting fast combinations together, just in case that Zellhuber does level change and take him down. So I think that Zellhuber might put that threat into this fight, but from the actual striking perspective, like I say, as long as he's got a game plan to deal with the speed of Johnson, I think that Zellhuber is just in a better, like I say, in a better position in his career. I think he's a very good striker. He's sharp. He's a sniper. He's going to fire down the middle. I think Johnson can be hurt. He can be got at as well. And I just think that it's definitely going to be an entertaining fight. But when I'm looking at the fighter that's going to get the hand raised at the end of the fight, I just think Zellhuber's going to do a much better job. Like I say, he's going to have the reach, the range, and if he manages that correctly, then Johnson is going to have to overwork to get into the boxing range to land the combinations, and he's going to have to do all of that hard work, whereas Zellhuber can just manage that reach and range effectively on the outside. And then if we do get into that situation where Johnson is struggling to land and he's got all this speed and power and explosivity that he wants to get out there but can't, I think we start seeing frustration setting in a little bit. Once frustration starts setting in, he'll start taking a few more chances of trying to, throw big punches to enter into the pocket, and Zellhuber can just snipe him and pick him apart, potentially find that punch that knocks him out as well. So yeah, all in all, I think Zellhuber, where he's at right now, is just in a much better position than Michael Johnson. He's got a lot of things on his side from a physical perspective, and with the wrestling as well. Although I know I'm putting emphasis on the wrestling, I don't think that Zellhuber is going to be I don't think he's going to be wrestle heavy. I don't necessarily think he's going to be overly successful either, but just adding that wrestling in will just break the flow and the fluidity of Johnson's striking and the speed of the combinations, which will allow Zellhuber to start being more successful within the striking himself. So the attempted wrestling will benefit the striking. For all the reasons that I've mentioned, I'm picking Daniel Zellhuber to win this fight. In the next fight, we've got a really, really good fight here. A really interesting fight stylistically, in my opinion, and one that I think is going to absolutely be hated on by the masses of people that, have analysed this fight, or the people that are coming onto this podcast to listen to the breakdown. I think this is going to be a super unpopular pick and prediction. We've got Kyler Phillips versus Vinicius Oliveira. So Vinicius Oliveira is everybody's love child at the minute. Everybody loves Oliveira. He's hyped. And to be fair to him, he's earned that. When you come off back-to-back wins against Ricky Simón and Said Nurmagomedov, you've earned the right to be super hyped. Like, some of these hyped fighters that come into the UFC are being hyped off beating guys that are nowhere near like the middle of a UFC division. But Vinicius Oliveira, not only did he beat Simón, and not only did he beat Said Nurmagomedov, which are big names in the division, not so much top 5, top 10, but they're still recognised names, but he beat them comfortably as well. So I'm not taking anything away from Vinicius Oliveira. He deserves the position that he's put himself in now. He's super explosive, super well-rounded. He's got power, he's got wrestling, he's got grappling. He's a very, very good fighter, right? But when you look at the two opponents that I've just mentioned, there's a common factor with both of those fighters in regards to their predominantly specialists in one specific area. So you look at Ricky Simón, he's predominantly a wrestler, and then obviously with the grappling once the wrestling works. And then you look at Said Nurmagomedov. Even though he's an Nurmagomedov and you think that he's a specialist with the wrestling and grappling, that's not true. He's a specialist with the striking. So you've got a specialist striker and a specialist wrestler and grappler, and what Vinicius Oliveira cleverly has done is game plan specifically to both of those fighters' weaknesses, to hit the weaknesses and to try and avoid the strengths. And you can do that when you're a very good, well-rounded fighter like Vinicius Oliveira, and that's why he's had success in doing it. Against Ricky Simón, he kept the fight standing and he beat Simón, stopped the wrestling, and Simón couldn't get his game going. And then he fights he fights Said Nurmagomedov, who's a striker. He hits takedowns against Said Nurmagomedov, makes it difficult for him, doesn't allow him to get the striking going, and then, hit the striking a little bit later in the fight when Said Nurmagomedov was absolutely knackered from the wrestling and grappling. So I feel that Vinicius Oliveira had two fighters there where he could really expose the weaknesses while staying away from the strengths. But you look at Kyler Phillips. Kyler Phillips is a good striker. He's a good wrestler. He's a good grappler. He doesn't have the specialist, skill set that, the last two fighters that Oliveira fought had. And therefore, he doesn't have that obvious hole in his game either. Now, when you're looking and analysing the difference between the fighters, look, I think Vinicius Oliveira, I'd give him the edge striking, but the grappling, I would definitely give the edge to Phillips. And, the wrestling's close, but again, Phillips is a product of the MMA lab. Like, these guys are just good everywhere, and they constantly produce fighters that are super well-rounded as well. So I actually think that Kyler Phillips is going to be a much, much harder fight for Oliveira than Said Nurmagomedov was and Ricky Simón was, because there's not anywhere that Oliveira can specifically target from a weakness perspective. And actually, Kyler Phillips, go back and look historically, he doesn't do badly against fighters that are high pace and pressure. Raoni Barcelos' high pace and pressure did well against him. You look at Song Yadong, elite fighter, high pace and pressure, beat him, did well against him. Oliveira, high pace and pressure. So it's a style of opponent that I think Kyler Phillips has thrived against in the past and genuinely does well against. And from Oliveira's side, I just don't think like I've already said, I don't think he's going to have that weakness in an opponent that he's going to go in there and completely exploit. I think it's going to be a close and competitive fight. I think that Kyler Phillips is a very, very underrated fighter in regards to his skill set, because he is a high-level wrestler and grappler, specifically the grappling, and the striking's okay as well. Like, he's beating guys like Raoni Barcelos, and he's a good fighter all round. I just think it's a super close and competitive fight. I think the line should be much shorter. It's not because of the hype on Oliveira. And look, from Kyler Phillips' side, like, Phillips could get takedowns in this fight. He did it against Song Yadong, had good top control time against him as well. And from a striking perspective, like I say, he's done well against other good strikers like a Barcelo. So what's stopping Kyler Phillips going in there, looking good from a striking perspective, mixing wrestling and grappling into it? I think if Phillips puts Oliveira on his back, I think Phillips is the way better topside grappler and will cause problems from a topside grappling perspective as well. So, like I say, it's like, people will break this fight down, and I guarantee they'll make out that Phillips has got no path to victory here, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Like, Phillips has legitimate paths to victory in this fight. He's got areas in MMA where he's better than Vinicius Oliveira. And like I say, the hype is gonna completely force people, in my opinion, to ignore the strengths of Phillips, who, like I say, in my opinion, is a top fighter with a good skill set. I know it's going to be, I've already said it, it's going to be unpopular from a pick and prediction perspective, but I am siding with Phillips. I'm picking Kyler Phillips to win this fight. And in the next fight, this might be one of the worst betting lines I've seen from either side, actually, in the last few years. We've got Marvin Vettori versus Brendan Allen. Now, Marvin Vettori sitting at around plus 200. There is money coming in on him, so I think he's going to level out probably at around plus 160 to plus 175 in that region, depending on what book you're looking at. But this is a fight, in my opinion, that should be absolutely a pick'em. Like, there's no reason Brendan Allen should be like minus 225. Bear in mind, he was near minus 300 24 hours ago as well. It's just absolutely crazy. I don't understand it. If there was ever a coin flip fight that, could go absolutely so many different ways, that should be 50-50, dead even, minus 110, minus 115 pick'em. It's this type of fight right here. So for you to have a defined underdog, even if it was Brendan Allen that was like plus 175, like, that would be just as stupid. I'm not saying that Marvin Vettori is going to run through Brendan Allen. What I'm saying is there shouldn't be a defined underdog in this fight. It should be a pick'em. It should be a straight pick'em. From Vettori's perspective, this is a fighter that really does only lose against the best of the best, and has been fighting the best of the best for many years in the UFC, constantly and consistently. He's had a championship fight as well. And then you've got Brendan Allen, who's just about getting there to starting to fight the best and the best. I still think he's a couple of fights away. If he beats Vettori here, that'll be one step, and then he'll have a step up from Vettori, and then you're going to get into the conversation of, right, now Brendan Allen's fighting the best of the best in the division. But he's not quite there yet. And you actually look at how these two match up. I think we're going to see a true mixed martial arts fight. I think we're going to see striking. obviously you're going to see striking all fights start standard. Although it's an area where Brendan Allen's improved, I think that Vettori's going to be the better striker. And then when you look at the grappling, like, that's Allen's biggest win condition. He's got to get on top of Vettori to win this fight, in my opinion. But then you look at the wrestling, like, Vettori's got good defensive wrestling. And sure, everyone's going to say, oh, well, he was taken down 4 times by Jared Cannonier. Well, Cannonier's not got bad wrestling himself, but also Cannonier had Vettori hurt badly in that fight and was able to capitalise with some takedowns because of it. Then when you look at Brendan Allen's offensive wrestling, well, those numbers aren't that great either. Like, he only hits just over 1 takedown per 15 minutes, and the takedown completion percentage is relatively low. And like I say, you compare that to Vettori's defensive wrestling, and I think Brendan Allen actually getting on top of Vettori, although it's, you can never say never, and of course it's probable, but the numbers tell you that it's not going to be easy. And then from Vettori's perspective, his offensive wrestling versus Brendan Allen's defensive wrestling, well, Vettori's got good offensive wrestling compared to Allen's defensive wrestling, and Vettori's a legitimate grappler himself, so who's to say that the win condition for Brendan Allen can't be flipped on him and Vettori have success in where Brendan Allen's supposed to have success in? Then, like I say, you go back to the striking, it's quite even, edge to Vettori, but like I say, whichever way you look at this fight, I could see a submission from either guy. I could genuinely see a finish from either fighter. I can also see a split decision. And in that split decision, I could see Vettori definitively winning a round, Brendan Allen definitively winning a round, and then one of those 3 rounds being the ultra close round that judges are conflicted on. I could also see 3 super close rounds where you, at the end of the fight, you're thinking, well, I'm glad I'm not a judge. Like, it just could go so many different ways. Like, one could be dominant, or it could be a super close split decision fight for multiple different reasons. It's just crazy. We've got a defined underdog in this fight, and that's the way I'm going to lean. For me, and I'd be saying the same thing if Brendan Allen was a plus 170 favourite underdog as well. If Brendan Allen was that sort of underdog, I'd be saying the same thing. Well, I'm picking Brendan Allen based on the odds being way too wide in a fight that should be a pick'em. So I'm actually going to side with Vettori. I'm picking Marvin Vettori to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Francisco Prado versus Nikolay Veretennikov. Now, Veretennikov has not had the best start to the UFC, especially last time out as well, where he was just, completely ran through, controlled, and, he just didn't look good at all. He's also aged as well, like his mid-30s. And you just won, I think his record's like 12-6, so it's not like a spectacular like 12-1 record or 15-1 or something like that. And then with his age as well, you just wonder what he's got to give in the UFC. Now, I definitely think this is a better fight for him than his last fight, because with Francisco Prado, he's probably going to be more willing to stand and strike, which is clearly where Veretennikov wants the fights to take place. He doesn't want another fight where he's on his back and he can't do anything. And Prado's coming off a loss against Jake Matthews as well. I actually bet Prado as an underdog there. I thought he'd perform better, but on the flip side of that, like, that's a loss that's going to age well, because Jake Matthews looks like he's on absolute fire right now and probably hit the success and the skill set that people thought he would years ago. And I think Matthews is finally coming into that now. So that is a loss for Prado that I think is going to age quite well. And Prado did go toe-to-toe with Jake Matthews as well. Did quite well. It's just it wasn't his night, and Matthews was better on the night. And yeah, like I say, I think it's an easier fight for Veretennikov from a stylistic perspective, but that doesn't mean that he's going to come in here and beat Francisco Prado. The one thing that I will say that I'm still concerned with Prado is the size. Like, I genuinely think that this isn't his weight class. He was outsized by Matthews. I think he's going to be way outsized by Veretennikov, who's quite big for the division. But what you're going to get on the plus side of that, and I used to say this with Michal Oleksiejczuk as well, when he fought light heavyweight, is although you're outsized physically, Prado's going to have speed, advantage. He's going to have the agility benefits. The trait, the physicality traits that rely on the speed and movement. So I think with Veretennikov, with him being older in age and a bit slower, and with his striking and his speed of movement as well, I think Prado's going to have a real good time just moving inside the cage, taking angles, landing strikes. landing 2 or 3 punches before Veretennikov can really put anything together himself. And then I think Prado's going to have watched the last fight and think, well, actually, I could take this guy down and do good work on top of him. Like, Prado's got a low, he took Jake Matthews down. So I think he's going to be able to take Veretennikov down and do good work on him. So ultimately, even though this is a better fight, in my opinion, stylistically for Veretennikov, because Prado isn't a lay and pray guy, I still think Prado could activate that level of game plan. And I think he's going to be the better striker as well. So what I'm saying is, with Prado more willing to strike, it's just going to give Veretennikov ways to win, a better chance of winning this fight than what the last fight was, where he was stuck on his back and just couldn't do anything. You've got no way of winning that fight unless you've got elite jiu-jitsu off your back, which Veretennikov doesn't have. So I think it's a better fight for Veretennikov, but one that I just think that he doesn't win. So for those reasons, I'm picking Francisco Prado to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Ateba Gautier versus Robert Valentin. So Gautier's a big favourite here. And, on one side of the coin, I see absolutely why he's a big favourite. Like, the dude's a freak athlete with freakish power. And I think he's definitely going to be one of these fighters that other fighters are going to shit themselves inside the cage against, because he's so physically imposing and he's got the power to knock you out. But the issue that Gautier's got, and I don't know whether it's something that he's actually worked on, and I don't know whether we're going to see it or not, but Gautier, in that Contender Series fight, won in round 2. But in round 1, he was took down pretty easily and just had absolutely zero answers off his back. Looked like he'd never done a day of jiu-jitsu in his life. Stuck on his back, didn't attempt to get on a hip or try and get back up to his feet. And it's a real concern. But again, you just don't know whether they're fixing those holes in training. And in his last fight, we didn't see it. Predominantly because the opponent wasn't that type of fighter, but also he got the knockout quite early on as well. So at some point, we are going to have to see if Gautier's fixed those holes. Now with Robert Valentin's a big guy for the division as well. He can get fights down to the mat, and he's a tricky grappler. So it's one of them where if we see that from Valentin, him being able to take Gautier down, Gautier's might get found out. Like, he might do, but he also might not, and we don't know that. Like, we don't know if he's patched the holes. But what we do have to do is go from what we've seen in tape, and the last time in tape we saw Gautier's defensive wrestling and grappling just wasn't there. So Valentin you've got to come to the conclusion that Valentin's got a solid path to victory here. However, the downside of Valentin and that path to victory is he's got to get close to Gautier to get him down. Gautier is super explosive, super powerful, super imposing. He's going to be the one that's going to want to come forward as well. So again, when you come to the wrestling, Valentin's going to need Gautier on the back foot. Not specifically, but he will prefer to get him on the back foot to shoot that takedown and get him down, because it's going to be very difficult if Gautier is looking to knock Valentin's chin into Rosette and have him on the back foot, and then Valentin trying to shoot takedowns in that situation. That's going to be very difficult to complete the takedown. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see which fighter actually activates the game plan. I personally, my gut feeling is Gautier is still going to have issues wrestling and grappling, because I don't think you fix him in that quick amount of time at this level in the UFC. But on the flip side here, I do think Valentin's going to be on the back foot and have a really imposing, aggressive fighter hitting him hard moving forwards, and I think Valentin's going to get caught with something and knocked out. That's my gut feeling of how the fight's going to play out. But at some point, Gautier's going to have this wrestling and grappling tested, and I'm just not sure it's going to be fixed. But until he fights that level of fighter that can weather a storm and defend correctly to close the distance and get the takedown, we're probably not going to find out. For right here and now, I'm picking Ateba Gautier to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Adam Fugitt versus the UFC newcomer Islam Dulatov. Now, Islam Dulatov's a big favourite in this fight, and you can see why. I think Fugitt thrives on the fact that he keeps getting these guys that, the UFC are putting him in there to, I wouldn't say to lose. I think that's definitely, a disrespectful term that I wouldn't want to go by. But Fugitt's not being put in there for something that he can thrive on and start building in the division. Like Islam Dulatov, this is a fight for him to build himself into the division. Put him in there, get him, get him under the bright lights. If there is any UFC jitters, then, and it's not his best performance, it still might be enough for him to get through the fight and move on. So, yeah, look, it's, like I say, Dulatov's a big favourite. You can understand why. The striking's good. He's got power. Fugitt probably does want to keep this fight standing, and he's probably going to be suited going toe-to-toe with Dulatov, and he will do that. Fugitt is a gamer. He's a dog. He'll get in your face and he'll fight you. But the thing is, if he's overly aggressive, overexerts himself, he could either A, walk onto something, or B, just walk into, a takedown coming from Dulatov. And I think if Dulatov gets Fugitt down, I think Fugitt's going to struggle off his back. Dulatov's got super good grappling, plenty of submissions. He's got ground and pound as well. He's your typical Russian, although it's stated he's from Germany. We all know a name, Islam Dulatov, probably wasn't born in Germany, or at least his heritage is not there. But he is your typical Russian with the grappling, the level of grappling, the ground and pound. One of those fighters where you're not quite sure whether he's going to win by submission or ground and pound. That was always the issue with like Khabib, for example. Not so much with Islam Makhachev, but with Khabib, you were just never sure whether it was going to be ground and pound or a submission. Dulatov's quite similar, but he does have a lot of submissions. So he's gonna have a massive gap in skill on the mat grappling. I think he gets it on the mat grappling, but I also think he hits Fugitt with some hard shots on the feet as well. So I kind of feel like Fugitt's outmatched here. If it's a 15-minute kickboxing fight, I think Dulatov wins. You add wrestling and grappling into the fight, and it's definitely Islam Dulatov. So for those reasons, I'm picking Islam Dulatov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jimmy the Brute, Crute versus Marcin Prachnio. Now, surely this has got to be the fight for Crute. Crute unfortunately had some issues. He went on a losing streak, kind of wasn't there anymore, lost the love of fighting, retired at like 27 or something like that, which is super young. That's not even entering your prime, especially at his weight class. Then he came back, the love for fighting came back. He looked great, he started off great, but then, I don't know whether the adrenaline dump got to him or whatever, but he hasn't won the bottom line is, from his record, he hasn't won in his last 5 fights, but he's also got 2 draws in there as well, which is unusual. So he's 0-3-2 in his last 5 fights. But this has got to be the one for Crute. I love Jimmy Crute. I think he's a fighter that's super well-rounded. High-level kickboxer, high-level BJJ black belt as well. It's just not kind of worked out for him for one reason or the other in the UFC, but he's still so young. He's still got so much time left that I just hope he wins here, that love soars, and then he starts to really pick himself back up and start putting a few wins together. But, from Jimmy Crute's perspective, like I say, he's a highly technical fighter wherever the fight goes. Marcin Prachnio is aggressive, he's dangerous as well, but generally speaking, the fighters that he loses against aren't the higher level guys in the UFC. And I think the guys that he's losing against are, the fighters around Jimmy Crute's level. The fighters that he's beaten, I just don't think are on Jimmy Crute's level. So I think Crute's got a good fight ahead of him here where he's going to be able to thrive. He's going to be able to take the fight wherever he wants to. If he wants to keep it standing striking, I think he can beat Prachnio in a striking fight for 15 minutes. But if he mixes in the wrestling and grappling, I think that's where his biggest gap in skill is going to be. So I think stylistically it's a good fight for Crute. I think he's got multiple paths to victory. I think he's a better fighter skill-wise than Marcin Prachnio. And I think this is the fight, the sixth time lucky, that Crute gets back in the win column. And I think he can get Prachnio out of there, whether that's a knockout or whether that's ground and pound or a submission as well. So I think it's a good fight for Crute. I think it's one that he should thrive in, and I'm really hoping we see the Jimmy Crute of old back, smiling, back to the winning column and into a position where he can start stacking up wins. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jimmy Crute to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Ryan Spann versus Lukasz Brzeski. Now, Ryan Spann had a horrible heavyweight debut. I actually bet Ryan Spann. I was very wrong. And I've never been high on Waldo Cortez Acosta, who Ryan Spann fought last time out. It turned out to be a horrific fight for Spann. But also Cortez Acosta is low-key looking better and better each time we see him. Like, he's one of these fighters where, look, I'll always be open to change my mind and opinion. Just show me why I should. And I'm always open to changing what I initially thought. And Waldo Cortez Acosta is slowly starting to do that with me. I didn't think that, I wasn't very high on Cortez Acosta since he came into the UFC. I thought he'd been, put in situations where, he'd had a lot of straightforward fights, shall we say. And yeah, the one fighter that I thought he did fight that was legit went through him. So, but recently, like, Cortez Acosta is looking solid. And I kind of think that loss that Spann had is going to age well. One, because it was his heavyweight debut and he got put against a Waldo Cortez Acosta that's looking really good. But also, like I say, Cortez Acosta's looking really good. So it's kind of like, well, yeah, Spann was supposed to lose that fight. But now Spann's got a Lukasz Brzeski. Now, Lukasz Brzeski was also knocked out by Waldo Cortez Acosta. But Lukasz Brzeski is not one of these top-level heavyweights. So I think it's a good fight for Spann to see actually where he's at. Because if Spann goes into this fight and loses, no disrespect to Brzeski, but if he loses to Brzeski, then it's like, well, where is Ryan Spann at? What does he do next? Where does he go? Because it's a difficult one. Spann vacated the light heavyweight division because I just genuinely think that he knew that there was a lot of good fighters above him, to the point where, his ceiling was absolutely limited at light heavyweight. So why not try a new weight class? He's going to be smaller but more athletic and carry power into that heavyweight division. So maybe he's going to have some real advantages in the heavyweight division that's going to allow him to climb further up the ladder than what he would at light heavyweight. So I completely understand the move. But the thing is with Spann, I don't know. I've got a difficulty with Spann because it's become quite clear over the last couple of fights that he wins when I expect him to lose and loses when I expect him to win. And for me, that's just a fighter that I'm having difficulty analyse. But I think Brzeski's the lower level UFC heavyweight that's probably the right opponent for Spann to come in there and look good against, if I'm being honest. So, look, you're looking at Brzeski. Brzeski might be able to land that punch that knocks Spann out. But look at what Waldo Cortez Acosta had to do. He had to put combinations together and really push forwards and put high volume on Spann and hurt him multiple times. I just don't think Brzeski's got that in him. Like, Brzeski could knock him out. Like, we're in the heavyweight division with 4-ounce gloves on in a UFC fight. You can never say that a fighter can't knock the opponent out in those conditions. But I just think Ryan Spann's going to be more technically skilled as a fighter than Brzeski. He's a better mixed martial artist. It's just if Brzeski wins, he's probably going to have a massive factor on the physicality, with Brzeski being a real heavyweight and Spann moving up from light heavyweight. Like, I don't think Brzeski could do light heavyweight in the UFC. So yeah, it's a difficult one. But like I say, I think Spann technically is a better mixed martial artist. I think he's going to be more athletic. He's going to be quicker. He's going to be faster. The power's going to be there for him, carrying up there at heavyweight as well. And yeah, Brzeski can be got at. So I am going to pick Ryan Spann. It's quite a reluctant one, really. I thought I'd be more confident in him than what I was. But I just kind of need to see it now in the heavyweight division. Beat Brzeski, take a little bit of step up in competition from Brzeski, but not quite your Waldo Cortez Acosta, and let's see what Ryan Spann can build. But right now, I've got to go with the fighter that I believe is the better mixed martial artist. So for those reasons, I'm picking Ryan Spann to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Bruno Ferreira versus Jackson McVey. Jackson McVey's supposed to fought a couple of weeks ago, making his short notice UFC debut, but so many things were just fucked up around that specific fight, with fighters pulling out and, weigh-ins, situations at weigh-ins and stuff like that. It was just a bit of a mess. So the UFC have rewarded Jackson McVey with a fight for actually, putting his name into the hat. Unfortunately for him, he gets Bruno Ferreira. Bruno Ferreira is a big favourite in this fight, and you can understand why when you look at the fight stylistically. Like, Jackson McVey is tall, he's long, but he loves to crash the pocket and be this super wild fighter. Now, it's actually going to serve him better against someone like Bruno Ferreira that's a little bit shorter and stockier if Jackson McVey just sits on the outside striking in. But two things. One, that's not normally how Jackson McVey fights. And secondly, if he does, I think Bruno Ferreira is just used to being able to close the distance, and I don't think Jackson McVey is that super technical outside range fighter that's going to snipe shots moving in. Snipe shots as his opponents moving in and keep that distance and range. So I ultimately think it's going to be a car crash type of fight with Jackson crashing into the pocket, and I think Bruno Ferreira is going to land something hard that knocks him out. But even if Bruno Ferreira doesn't do that and he wants to get into level changes, take him down, I think the wrestling and the topside grappling will be enough to get McVey struggling as well off his back. So I kind of feel like wherever the fight goes, Bruno Ferreira is going to be the better fighter. But I think with the way that McVey fights, I think he's going to crash the pocket and get hit with something super hard and get knocked out. So for those reasons, I'm picking Bruno Ferreira to win this fight. And in the next fight, the final fight to break down, we've got Carly Judas versus Nicole Cagliari. Now, I don't like seeing like a minus 250, minus 300 in this type of fight, which is what Carly Judas is lined as the moderate to big favourite. Because I do think it's this type of fight that's got a lot of recency bias because of the last fight against Eunice Duben, who was coming off that, famous Contender Series viral KO where she was a massive underdog there and she absolutely starched her opponent. And so she's coming to the UFC with hype, and Carly Judas has absolutely mopped the floor with her quite easily and quite quickly as well. So now there's recency bias on Carly Judas's line. Like, if the last fight didn't happen for Carly Judas, I think the betting line would be much closer in this fight, which again backs my point of, there's recency bias baked into a betting line. Now what you've got here is you've got Carly Judas that's got good striking, good range management. She's got good volume versus a Nicole Cagliari that's quite aggressive, that will try and come forwards and get takedowns. And she's got a decent takedown game and good topside grappling. So you've got a clash in styles here. So this is what I mean by I just don't think there should be a favourite of that size. I think if you're looking at Carly Judas at minus 140, minus 150, then it's probably about right. But I think the line's too wide. With that being said, which fighter is going to activate the game plan? Well, I trust Carly Judas a little bit more. She's got slightly more UFC experience, and I like the volume approach. I think Cagliari will score takedowns, but does she score takedowns and completely nullify Judas on the mat? Well, I don't think so. I think the volume's going to play a factor in this fight. I think we're going to see a true mixed martial arts fight. Some takedowns from Cagliari, but also Judas just landing some nice strikes on the feet, volume approach. And when all is said and done, if there's not a finish and it does go to the judges' scorecards, I think the fight's going to have been won and lost on the feet. Is my ultimate gut feeling is the fight's going to be won and lost on the feet. And because of that, you have to favour Carly Judas, even though I don't like the betting line as it is right now. But for all the reasons that I've mentioned, I'm picking Carly Judas to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. As always, thank you for everybody tuning in and listening, whether you're on one of the podcast platforms like Spotify, Amazon, Apple, or whether you're tuning in onto YouTube, which is youtube.com/MMA Play 365. Thank you for everybody tuning in. I've just given you the YouTube URL because if you are on one of the podcast platforms, please drop over onto YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's super free, super easy. You get notifications every week when we drop a podcast, and it also really helps the channel, really helps us as well. And also in the YouTube section, you can of course drop a comment, tell me where we disagree, tell me who you're betting on, tell me who your favourite underdog is, who your favourite fighter is to win on the card, maybe drop your favourite parlay, whatever you want to do. It is myself that does reply to the comments. I'll always try my best every single week to get back to the comments and personally reply. So yeah, please do that. Please jump onto YouTube and subscribe to the channel. And for one last time, if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend for UFC 318 with the baddest motherfucker title on the line, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. All of our betting subscriptions are super affordable. Our ethos here, as I say every single week, is we want you to make the money back that you spend with us as quickly as you possibly can so you can start profiting on top of your bets. And you're not going to do that if we're charging $400, $500, $600, $700 a year. We make it super cheap, super affordable, so you can make your money back quickly, start profiting on your bets. It's just $5 for one event, it's $10 a month, or it's $99 for the entire 12 months, 1 year subscription. As I said, super affordable. We've got something for every type of gambler, and every subscription comes with Base AI, our UFC prediction software as well. So one last time, that's MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome, thanks for listening, and I'll be back in a few weeks once I've returned from Greece. Enjoy the cards, enjoy the UFC, and I hope you cash your bets whilst I'm away.